Welcome to the second generation Honda Jazz, my personal recommendation if you're looking for a no-nonsense, reliable car on a limited budget. Confession time, I actually bought one of these cars a couple of years ago, not that long ago actually, in less fortunate times, just to get back and forth to work. I bought the car for about, I think it was £550, and that car never let me down once. It was still passing MOTs 2 years on from when I got it, so I've got a bit of an affinity towards these. So there's your first point. They're about as reliable as they are uncool. Economical? Yes. Practical? Absolutely. Cool? I don't think we can push that one with a Honda Jazz. I tell you what though, its party piece is these cars really are quite engaging to drive. I remember being part of a conversation between the owner of a Ferrari F430 and a Lamborghini Gallardo, the automotive world's elites, absolutely, and I was so shocked to find the conversation turn to how fun a Honda Jazz is to drive. I don't think they owned them personally. I think it was one of their wives owned one and the other guy had driven one at some point, but I was elated by this. I thought I was alone in thinking these cars were quite good fun to drive, but there you have it. Some praise indeed. Now don't get me wrong, the Jazz, as you probably expect, is set up first and foremost to be comfortable, unjarring and easy to drive. It's also extremely smooth. Even if I mash the throttle pedal right now, the car somehow manages to accelerate but smooth it out. Go Honda Jazz. That's a lot of revs. Still smooth though. It's a relaxing place to be. It's a bit more mashed potato than salt and pepper chips. It's a bit more nursing home than wild night out in the town. So engine-wise, you could get a 1.2 or a 1.4. Now, quite honestly, the manner in which you drive a Jazz dictates it's probably not going to make that much difference. But let it be said, the 1.4 is better at motorway speeds. So if you tend to find yourself on motorways fairly frequently, then that's probably the one to go for. Now, be aware as well, Honda did bring out in 2011 a hybrid Jazz. It's what we would term as mild hybrid technology now. It was early technology and honestly I'd probably just avoid it for that reason, and also it's not that much more economical than the 1.4, doesn't add any more power, and you've just got that added issue of having these older batteries in the car that are going to need replacing at some point. As for the chassis and suspension, rather unsurprisingly, it's a bit like that engine. It caters towards a very smooth, unjarring driving personality, and honestly, even if I try and force a sudden movement into the steering, it sort of disregards it as, you couldn't possibly have meant to swerve right there. Let me just get rid of that input for you. So gearbox wise, you could of course get your Jazz in a manual or an automatic. Now manuals, there's not an awful lot to say there other than they are most common. If you're looking on the used market now, that's mainly what you're going to find. Now if you are specifically seeking out an automatic, be aware that there were some changes in that 2011 facelift point. Now pre-2011, pre-facelift, what you're going to get is the gearbox that's in this car, the I-Shift gearbox. Now this took a little bit of flack when it was new, I think mainly coming from customers who were used to traditional automatics getting into this, because it's not an automatic in technical terms, it's an automated manual gearbox. Now don't get me wrong, for all practical purposes it drives just like an automatic. I've only got 2 pedals. However, its behaviour and its mannerisms on the road are a bit like a manual car, so you get a little pause between gear changes, things like that. When you're taken away, you can feel the clutch biting more so than you can in a traditional automatic car. So what I would say is if you're buying a pre-2011, pre-facelift Jazz, try driving one of these, try driving it with the I-Shift gearbox and make sure you like it. Me personally, I really do quite like it. I think it's quite quirky, and it also reminds me of my Ferrari 360's gearbox. That actually has the exact same system, so it's an early technology really. Now, post-2011, Honda did switch back to the CVT gearbox. Now, I say switch back because that's what the Jazzies originally had. The automatic option in the first generation was a CVT gearbox, and I guess through customer complaints and maybe a bit of pressure, they decided to go back to it for the facelift. So interior wise, this was a big jump up from the Jazzies of old. This thing feels properly screwed together, and even at, what, 13 years old, this car, there's no creaks or rattles whatsoever. Also really like these extra little windows they added in. All this glass gives it a really airy, big feeling in this interior. Also, all the buttons, they are, don't get me wrong, they're really easy to access and use, but everything's in like really big font. It's kind of like the car equivalent of, you know, when an old person changes their iPhone to use the really big text? That's what I feel like I'm looking at here. Now, this being a posh Jazz, a top of the line EX model, we get our big panoramic roof, which is really quite awesome, and it also makes filming a lot easier with all this light coming in. And we also get proper climate control in here, so for a small car, really well equipped. Now, if you take one step down the spec list to the SE, that's probably the lowest spec that I would personally buy. That still includes alloy wheels and you still get your air conditioning, but if you go further down than that to the S, you don't get any of those things. A bit too bargain basement, but we're sitting pretty in our posh Jazz here. Try and get an EX, because this roof is worth it alone. Sorry for the interruption, but something I need to show you, because it doesn't matter what spec Jazz you go for, they all come with these magic seats, as termed by Honda. Now, they fold flat, obviously, nothing especially magic about that, but what they also do is fold right up and secure into place. So if you've got a big potted plant or something, you can get it in there. Maybe that explains the high ratio of Jazzies at garden centres. Now, having owned a first generation Jazz, I've had the pleasure of actually covering a fair few miles in them. And one thing I will say is, quite honestly, any long journey was a bit of a chore. They just weren't that refined, they were kind of noisy, you got road noise, you got tyre noise, the engine it was kind of coarse. This is where this thing is a revelation. Okay, it's no Mercedes S-Class, but you could certainly cover a fair few miles on one of these, even at motorway speeds, and not feel completely worn out. That's the big difference between the cars. So my least favourite thing about driving a Honda Jazz, well, it's a problem that actually the car can't do much about. It's not a fault of the car. It's the way that other road users sometimes treat you. Not every road user, obviously, 90% of them are perfectly respectable, but certain road users, I don't know, I've never felt more bullied than I do in a Jazz. I don't know why, but you just seem to really attract the tailgaters, people sitting right up behind you, people getting close to you, people pulling out on you. I don't know what it is, just something about this car. Now, if you've driven one of these or a similar small car, please do write in the comments below if you can relate to what I'm saying here. Now, if you are considering buying one of these cars, then click in the top right hand corner now so I can take you through all the common problems and help you get a good one. Although they're really reliable, there's still some things you need to check when buying a used example. But honestly, you should. If you're on a tight budget and you can't afford to be left stranded anywhere, there's honestly one car I would be looking at, and it's the Honda Jazz. Either the first generation or second generation, just depending on your budget. We've got buyer's guides for both of them. It really is a car that will look after you, and so will we if you hit that like button and hit the subscribe button for more car advice. We'll see you for the next video.